Hey, how's it going? My name's Andy Monroe and welcome back to my YouTube channel. In today's video, I'm going to be talking about the 3 biggest mistakes I've made as an event planner. But before I get into it, make sure you drop a comment and hit the subscribe button. That helps get my videos out to more people. And this is also a brand new channel, so any comment that you drop below, any questions you have about throwing live events, I will look at and turn into a video. Thank you, really appreciate it. So over the last 2 years, I've been throwing live events for a company called FunLaunch. These events have been anywhere from a couple dozen people to a couple thousand people. Even though they have all been very successful, I've still made a ton of mistakes along the way. But now looking back, those mistakes I've made have been the moments where I've learned the most. And now I want to communicate to you what I learned from those mistakes so that you don't have to make those mistakes to learn those lessons. Now, the first mistake I'm going to talk about is trying to run the entire event myself. Now, the first event I threw was FunLaunch Live in 2022. Now for this event, I was actually throwing it with one of my coworkers, but our mindset going into that event is that we had to run the entire show. And I'm sure you know this, but if you don't, throwing a live event has so much overhead. There are so many things happening at once before the event and after. It is absolutely impossible to expect yourself to be able to run the entire show. But since it was our first event, we had absolutely no idea. And I thought that as the head of the events, as the event planner, I had to be the one in charge, making sure that everything was running good. Even on day one, there's registration going on. The audio-visual team is getting set up in the ballroom. Food and beverage is being set up. There's speakers arriving on site. There's hundreds and hundreds of people flowing into the foyer area, getting ready for the event to start. And I have 25 team members who all need to know where they need to be at all times during the event. And that's just scratching the surface. Now, I feel like I don't need to explain why it's a bad idea for me to expect to be able to run that entire show. As an event planner, the best skill you can learn is how to delegate. If you can delegate projects, if you can delegate parts of the event off to your trusted team members, it's gonna be run way smoothly. The FunLaunch Live 2 in Miami, I chose 5 team captains to run their own parts of the event. Somebody was over registration, somebody was over our VIP area, somebody was over sales and marketing, someone was managing the backstage area. And it was my job to go around to these team heads, to these team captains, and make sure everything was going okay. But I gave them complete responsibility over their sector of the event, and it could not have ran better. So the lesson I learned from this first mistake of thinking that I have to run the entire show was that it's important to delegate projects and segments of the event off to your team. You almost have to let your ego go. If you're an event planner, your ego is gonna want you to have control over everything, but you have to let go. That's gonna cause way too much friction for the event to run smoothly. So make sure you delegate. Now the second big mistake I've made, which I've made a few times, is not doing my due diligence on the contracts that I'm signing. Now going back to the first FunLaunch Live, this is where a lot of my mistakes are made since it was the first event I ever threw. After we signed the contract, I began to realize exactly what we committed to. And that's the name of the game. Before you sign a contract, you need to know every single thing that you're committing to. At that time, we didn't really have a legal team to review our contracts and make sure that we weren't tying ourselves into anything way over our head. But now we have an amazing legal team that will read the fine print of every single contract, send me a massive email of everything that we're committing to, and give me a call to walk through the entire thing, and to give me their input on what we should and should not include into the contract. And this has been a game changer. Going back to that first FunLaunch Live, one thing that we didn't know we were committing to was working with the in-house audiovisual partners to set up the entire display of the event. And this event was in Las Vegas, so you can only imagine how expensive it was a couple weeks before the event when we realized that we had to pay this partner and only this partner to run the audiovisual. It was an extremely unpleasant surprise, and it was a lesson that I learned and one that I will never forget. If I could have any advice for you, every single contract that you receive for an event, make sure your legal team reviews it. And if you're in the beginning phase and you don't have a legal team, make sure any of your coworkers review it. And as much as it's going to suck, if you don't have anybody else that can review it, you're gonna have to review it yourself. You have to read every single word on that contract. So I promise you, you do not want to miss anything that will cause you to pay a giant sum of money, or that will cause some other consequence right before the event when your back's against the wall and you can't do anything. It's not a great feeling. So make sure you do your due diligence on your contract. Now the third and final mistake I'm going to talk about is not creating the proper conditions for my team to succeed. Now I'm far from perfection as an event planner, and this is a mistake that I have continuously made throughout all the events that I've thrown. It was very significant in FunLaunch Live 1 when I thought that I was the one that was supposed to be running the entire event. That put my entire team at a massive disadvantage. All 25 people were trying to talk to me and get questions answered, and it just wasn't sustainable. It really set everybody else up for failure. Another example of this was at this last FunLaunch Live with the review process of our graphics that were submitted by our designer. For an event like FunLaunch Live, there are a ton of graphics that are being made. We have all the branding out in the foyer area. We had this massive LED screen behind the stage that had a giant picture of the speaker, their face, like these gold sparkles going up. It had their name in big letters that covered almost the entire length of the stage. It was a pretty cool setup. And for every single speaker, we had a graphic that needed to be made. But I didn't have a spell check process in place, so I'm sure you can only guess what happened. One of the speakers had their name spelled wrong, and since there was nothing in place to check for spelling errors, it made it all the way up to the stage and displayed in front of 2,000 people with the incorrect spelling. And when I saw that, my stomach dropped. Honestly, my initial reaction was to be really upset with our graphic designer. Then I had to stop myself and give myself a check and realize that as the head of events, I need to have the proper checks and balances in place to make sure that my team can succeed. Our designer is a designer, and they are amazing at their job. They create the best graphics I've ever seen, but they're not an English major. It's not their job to spell every single thing right. I need to make sure that I'm checking the spelling, I'm checking the quality, I'm checking everything about these graphics to make sure it's up to our standard and to make sure that there's no errors. So going forward, I'm gonna have checks and balances in place to make sure that doesn't happen again. Now I could go on and on about different examples of me not creating the proper conditions for my team to succeed. And it's a lesson that I'm gonna keep learning as I develop as an event planner. But if I had any advice for you, just make sure you're checking anywhere in your event planning process and the event itself where weeds are growing. If there are mistakes happening or the same questions are popping up, or you're getting the same feedback, that means there's a weed growing and you need to create the proper conditions to make sure it doesn't continue to grow. Because the more weeds you have in your event planning process, the more it inhibits flow and creates friction. And friction in the planning process and the event itself is one way to set an event up for failure. Now, I'm sure I'll make more videos on this in the future. I've made tons of mistakes in the events that I've planned, so I'm sure I could share more insights. But those are the ones I'm going to cover for today. Like I said at the beginning of the video, make sure you hit the subscribe button and drop a comment. That helps these videos get out to more people, help more people in event planners avoid making these mistakes. And it also gives me more ideas for videos. If you have any questions about throwing live events or just want to hear any stories about the events that we've thrown, drop in a comment below and I'd love to make a video on it. Sweet, that's all I got for you today. I'll see you in the next one.